Broadcasting live from Houston, from the space city to the world. You are watching NowMedia Television.
Welcome to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. I'm Jen Gaudet, your fearless host, entrepreneur, investor, and business strategist. Why are we here? Because I believe that iron sharpens iron. And when we bring successful entrepreneurs and investors here to share what's working in business and maybe even some of what's not, what we are all able to do is learn from one another and grow. As a result, our businesses grow, and the ripple effect impacts not only ourselves, our teams, and their families, but also our communities and our world. You're in for a treat today because I am here in studio with Christopher Turner of EMERGICON. He is a rock star founder of a healthcare industry business here in the Texas area. Yes, I am hometown today, and we are going to talk all things business. Welcome to the studio, Christopher.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it.
I'm really excited. I have been waiting a long time. This has been a long time in coming. We've been communicating for months, I believe,
That's
trying
right.
to get this.
Yeah.
And so I really want to dive in because healthcare is a really convoluted industry. It's very hard to have margins. It's really very hard to grow, and you have done that. What is the secret to your success?
It's people. It's always people. It's always building an organization, building a culture where people want to be there, they want to contribute, and they want to be involved in something that has purpose. So we support fire and EMS, touches a lot of people's lives, and a lot of people choose to work for us because they have some connection to that side of the business.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know anybody who hasn't had an emergent situation happen to themselves, to a family member, to somebody that they know. And you're really kind of demystifying the whole emergency billing situation. It's very convoluted. What drove you to actually start this and to pursue this particular aspect?
My background evolved into healthcare finance. You and I've talked about that previously as we shared our background story, and we have some commonality there. So healthcare finance is kind of the misunderstood part. So everybody understands physicians and mid-level providers and all those different things that the people you see. The mystifying part is the reimbursement part. And so as I got into it, and I'm fairly analytical, I just looked at things that just didn't make sense to me. And as you get more emergent, it gets more confusing.
And you know, I'm not going to lie. We always talk about on this show, you need to know your numbers. We talk about numbers. I am not a fan of numbers. I have to force myself to do that.
Yep.
And here you are. That is your game. And so how were you able to kind of demystify it for yourself and find a path forward in this really challenging environment that's always changing?
It is. Not a year goes by that something that major doesn't change in healthcare. Every single year. I try to look at it very simply, which is, one patient is equivalent to something, some interaction, and then there's a combination of factors. So in emergency medicine, it winds up being fairly simple. So in an ambulance, it's generally one patient in the back, and that one patient might be associated with a claim or a bill of some kind. There may be an ability to pay, there may not be an ability to pay, it may be covered by a governmental program. There's lots of options there. So it's simple in that terms. It gets more complicated as you realize all the other factors that can come into play. If a person's unconscious, it's been a car wreck, if they're a victim of crime, all kinds of things. That's where it gets really hard, and you have to really have a strong process and a strong people component to really work through that.
And so you're naturally sort of analytical minded, and I guess you talk about people, but you also have to be fairly process oriented in order to do this. How were you able to, talk to me about, break it down, because there's a lot of people that have struggled. A lot of our viewers are always like, where do I start with my standard operating procedures? Where do I start with process if I've got this mess? So kind of walk me through, how do you pick the first process to put in place, and how do you determine how that evolves over time?
So I'm a horrible process person.
Oh,
horrible
really?
Process person. Personally, I really am. However, I think the lesson is when you know that you're not good at something, you have to augment with other things. And so for me, we employ a system. So it's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's just the way we organize and run our company. That is very process driven. So that forces you and our organization, the leadership team and all, to work through that. Because The thing that I preach that I'm not good about is, if you have a model, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, whatever it is, it's the same. Everywhere you go, it's the same. It's not wildly different. I'm fascinated by that because that's all process-based. That's all it is, and I'm not that. If I were there, everything would come out different all the time. So I think you have to lean into those weaknesses and realize I got to augment somewhere. It may be people-based, it may be process-based, it may be a lot of things.
And so, as you know this about yourself, and kudos to you, because I'm going to also call it another elephant in a room. It's something we get a lot of questions about. How do you know who to hire or what skills to hire for?
Yep.
And one of the biggest mistakes we see in business, especially in the starting phase, is they hire a lot of people like them.
Yes.
With similar skill sets.
Yes.
Whereas you just said, I'm weak in process. Was your first hire or one of your first hires or one of your first team members someone who was strong in process?
First hire was strong in process, so that was great. One of the things that I realized that I would encourage anybody who's founded a business, get out of the part of hiring yourself, because you're the worst hirer, because you are passionate about what you do and you believe in it, and so you wind up selling the person in, and that feels great, but that's not what you need. You have to really look at what they're bringing to the table. So I was fortunate, started off with a strong process person, very technically able. From there, as she retired, then it got a lot more challenging, because you have to have people who can create the areas where you need them to focus, where you're not going to be strong, or maybe they're part of a team that needs that strength.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask you a next question, because process-oriented, people-oriented, certain skill sets are real, we call them hard skills versus soft skills. And a lot of times people hire for either a strong skill set or a culture match.
Yep.
What's your thoughts on that? and how do you approach that? Because it's like a debate around here. I ask a lot of people this question because my viewers are constantly in my inbox. What should I do? And I'm like, well, watch the show. Listen to the different points of view, because there's not a right or a wrong, but what's kind of your school of thought, and how do you choose? Like I heard you don't actually do the hiring, but how did you get your team on board, and what do you think about that culture versus values versus skill sets?
So I will steal from the city of Addison's fire department, where they have a plaque as you walk in that says, "We hire for attitude, we teach skills."
Oh, okay.
I 100% agree with that, and you have to make sure that's legitimate, because when somebody interviews, that's their shiniest, brightest they're going to be, certainly. So you really have to have some questions that dig in to make sure you understand, are we a real values fit? So in the EOS model I referenced earlier, there's a piece of that, but that's very, very important. You got to hire slow. You have to make sure those values are really there. And then you can teach skills. And then if it's not a fit, you unfortunately have to get rid of them fast. But so often we need people, let's hurry up, let's get them on whatever. They showed up, they seem okay and whatever. And then you get further down the road and you're pulling your hair out and you're wondering, what do I need to do to craft them? And sometimes it's not a you thing. Sometimes it's just not a values fit.
Mm-hmm. Or it was a fit and now they have had a life event or
Could be.
something that's impacting. So
Could be.
I really like that. And I'm a strong believer in hire slow, fire fast as well, because the other thing is, and this is something we talk about a lot on the show, and that's, if you have something that's not a good fit, you have to cut the cord as soon as possible, because that will actually negatively impact everyone else.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm going to ask you now, have you ever had to walk someone out of the door because it was no longer a fit? And how did you handle that? Like, what's the best practice there?
Many times over the course of my career, and I am quick like a Band-Aid. We're in Texas, so we don't necessarily have a lot of bureaucracy that might weigh some of that down. They need to know, they need to not be surprised. I can't say I've always been great about that, but I'm very much, hey, this isn't working, we need to part ways and move on. I will tell you something I've learned, and I've learned this from our COO, Tiffany Pearson, fairly recently, and I almost feel like I have a few apologies to hand out. Don't give unspoken expectations. I've been bad about that. I'm sure we all are, which is you think, why aren't they figuring this out? Have you told them? Have you explained this as an expectation of their role? They may be cool with it, and maybe you just haven't conveyed that to them. So look at yourself too and make sure you haven't done that. But if it's clearly not a fit, just move on. It's best for them. They'll be happier somewhere else and you'll be happier.
Absolutely. I love your approach. I'm a Band-Aid ripper myself, and I am definitely the person who cannot be accused of beating around the bush.
Yeah.
And I know that it's very hard for other people. Everybody's got a different personality type and a different way of managing conflict. And so as we think about hiring fast, hiring slow, firing fast, and we think about people and building your culture, I'm going to ask you, how do you determine when is it time to bring on new team members? Because a lot of times clients that I coach, they want to wait until they're at 100% capacity. Well, then you just have to hire a beating heart because you're in emergency mode to liken it to your business. When is the time to start thinking, and how do you determine who is the next hire that you're going to be?
I think you ought to always be building capacity. I really do. I think that you ought to have great lead generation and sales that's always bringing that. I think the machine works better when everybody is moving towards growth because people want to grow. So even if they don't want to move up into a management role, they still want to grow as an individual. And they can do that within a company that's growing. That's just the way it works. Identifying the next hires is tricky, and that's sometimes harder because you have to decide what's the level we need. And you hear people all the time talk about hire at the level you want to get to, you know, don't just hire for the immediate. That can be hard because the person coming in has to see that growth for themselves. If they're thinking maybe they're stepping to the side to help another company grow, I think it's really important to follow what your need is from a process standpoint versus what the people need is. So you hire to fill the process role and the accountability of what needs to happen, not that the person I don't think our society does a great job of saying that. We hear names and we think they were hired because they were this or that, or they have some name associated. That's not always the best idea. Sometimes you have to really look at what the pieces you need to fill, then find that person.
Right, fill the gaps.
Fill the gaps, yeah.
I absolutely concur, and you know, I'm just saying, like, I always think about where is the bottleneck in the business, and then once I solve that bottleneck, what's the next bottleneck going to be? Because I think a lot of times, and I coach a lot of businesses, and the thing that always cracks me up is they're so focused on the immediate bottleneck, and they don't really consider, well, when we open that up, guess what? There's also another one. So what else down the line? And when we look at it, I always like to say, okay, what's our immediate bottleneck, and then what are the next three? And try to find that in the process, process and in the people side, because that way you're not always under the gun and in the emergency. My hair's on fire. I need to bring a heartbeat into the building. So
yes, correct.
I really like your approach. Thank you for that. We do have to take a brief break, but we will be right back after these messages.